Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back in San Diego. I've been in Washington, D.C. With Council members Mark Kersey and Lorie Zapf and about 100 other San Diegans advocating for the best for our city and for our region. Of course, in stark contrast to the bipartisanship and the collaboration which we've seen return to City Hall in recent weeks. When we went to Washington, D.C. and the federal government shut down, you can see that we had a thing or two we could hopefully teach them. I want to talk a little bit about the shutdown because it's having a tremendous impact. Most obviously is today's announcement of the cancellation of the Miramar Air Show. And though the air show had already been modified because of sequestration, San Diegans were looking forward to their annual pilgrimage to Miramar to celebrate our armed forces. The emotional and the economic impacts of losing this year's event are great, and I'm extremely disappointed in the political dysfunction that has brought us to this point. Other than the air show, most of the local impacts of the shutdown are expected to be somewhat indirect. We're anticipating potential for lower sales taxes, lower TOT, and a potential impact to the city's credit rating if the federal credit rating was to take a hit as well. The direct impacts may include the lack of Federal Aviation Administration support for air traffic control tower at Brown Field. However, Brown Field is anticipated to stay open to air traffic. A longer-term federal government shutdown would likely adversely impact the city's capital improvement program because of the fact that we often need to get permits through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and other federal agencies, and because the federal grants often pay for some reimbursements for some of these programs. Finally, the city may be unable to reimburse ourselves for our community development program grants expenditures to our subrecipients, which would cause a cash flow issue for our CDBG program. So it's my hope that members of Congress that we met with in recent days would learn from the collaborative spirit of the members of the San Diego delegation who went and will use that collaboration to end the shutdown as soon as possible. If it doesn't, I will certainly keep San Diegans updated on the impacts to our city. While the shutdown did create some longer lines to get into certain federal buildings, we managed to have a very successful visit, and I wanted to share some of the things that we were able to accomplish. First off, on Monday, I met with the Smithsonian Institution with members of the Balboa Park Celebration, Inc., to discuss their ongoing participation in the 2015 Centennial Celebration in Balboa Park. BPCC, or the Balboa Park Celebration Committee, is seeking to formalize its relationship with the Smithsonian Institution, considering discussion of loans of various Smithsonian objects to bring to San Diego in 2015, as well as the Smithsonian hosting some of the Smithsonian's exhibits in the park for the year, and getting assistance with bringing certain speakers to the forum that is anticipated to be held in Balboa Park throughout the centennial year. I also had positive meetings with Senators Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein about the Point Loma wastewater permit. They pledged their help for ongoing discussions with the Environmental Protection Agency in advance of the 2015 permit extension. As far as the San Ysidro Port of Entry, there is continued support from all corners in Washington for the next phases of construction. We had bipartisan meetings with members of Congress both in San Diego and representing other areas, and all members expressed their support for reducing border wait times and increasing security for legitimate travelers. Ongoing coordination with the Mexican government. We had a really positive meeting with the Mexican ambassador to the United States. And I joined with Jerry Sanders of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce to support the Safe and Secure Border Infrastructure Bill, which was introduced by Congressman Scott Peters while we were in Washington. In other meetings, I shared the condolences of our city with the Secretary of the Navy with regard to the Navy Yard shooting recently happened, and repeated our belief that San Diego is the best place for any future realignments or relocation of military forces. And I also continued the advocacy of our trolley extension known as the Midcoast Extension with members of Congress and with the U.S. Department of Transportation. So three very productive days. Now I'm home, and as you may know, we announced yesterday that Chief Operating Officer Walt Eckert has announced his return to retirement. Walt has been a tremendous asset to this city, our employees, and to me personally. His calm demeanor, his immediate grasp of issues, the trust that he has of the staff, and his leadership, of course, will be missed. He deserves an enormous amount of credit for helping put our San Diego back on our city back on solid footing after all the turmoil in recent months. His management of the city's day-to-day operations has been invaluable and has served to showcase his truly remarkable talents. Walt Eckert, along with Scott Chadwick, have been a team in helping to steady our city, and I'm confident that the progress that we've made will continue in Scott's capable hands. Walt's last day will be October 30th. Switching gears a bit, I want to highlight an item that is coming to City Council in a couple of weeks as a part of the reconfiguration of the Plaza de Panama in Balboa Park. There have been a number of concerns that have been raised about the lack of accessible parking. The City Council will consider a plan to add 9 more accessible parking spaces in the Alcazar lot, bringing the total number of spaces, accessible spaces, to 14. If this is approved, there will be more than a simple restriping job. Some of the regrading is necessary to make sure that all the spots that are deemed accessible actually are accessible. I anticipate that work beginning later this winter and hopefully completed by next summer, should the council agree with that plan. There are additional improvements that are coming, namely planter boxes for trees, some other items that will hopefully activate the Central Plaza area. And of course, we're continuing to work to bring the trams online to increase the public's access to our city's crown jewel. Further evidence that the city is back, I am proud to now be listed among the mayors who support the freedom to marry. This is a broad-based and nonpartisan group of nationwide mayors who believe that all people should be able to share in the love and commitment of marriage. Our previous administration had not been a part of that list, but we now are there. San Diego has continually spoken up to support equality, and I'm proud to be among other like-minded mayors across the country. You're welcome to see San Diego's representation at freedomtomarry.org and click on the Mayors for the Freedom to Marry link. Full evidence that we know and value knowledge and technology, literacy and education can now be seen at your Central Library. How many of you were there for the opening? I hope you enjoyed it. Presiding over that ceremony was very exciting. Pleased that we now have the San Diego Central Library at Joan and Erwin Jacobs Common. I'm really grateful to our library director, Deborah Barrow, and her team, and the architects, designers, and builders, and generous funders who transformed our skyline and our future with this new library. Really stands out in our community. I just am so grateful, and I hope that the thousands and thousands of San Diegans who were there on Saturday got to see what they had all been waiting for 30 years. It was worth the wait. Our next major civic project is the Phase 3 expansion of the Convention Center. Though the Coastal Commission staff has recommended denial of the project, I remain confident, as do leaders of cities throughout our region, that the expansion is the right project to spur our convention and tourism industry and to benefit our economy and our community. We are continuing to have discussions with Coastal Commission staff in advance of the hearing. The entire Coastal Commission will consider the project on October 10th at its meeting at the Crown Plaza in Mission Valley. I expect to be there along with many, many other San Diegans to advocate for approval of this project. And finally, before I get to your questions, I wanted to give you the latest on the food truck enforcement update. As of Monday, there had still been only 3 complaints received and investigated by our neighborhood code compliance staff. I certainly appreciate the industry's passionate opposition to enforcement of our current laws, but I find the reality is demonstrating that the city of San Diego is not, in fact, obliterating food trucks. I hope that the industry will utilize its passion to join me in passing sensible ordinances that will allow them to operate on private property. So with all of those, it's quite a long list of things that we've been up to. Thank you for sitting through that. Happy to take any questions anyone has.
You've been to Washington before, I'm sure.
Yeah.
How different was it this time? Was it just kind of weird with the looming shutdown? And then I guess you were probably there for a part of the beginning of it.
Yeah, I was there Sunday night through Wednesday afternoon. A couple things. Number one, obviously by Tuesday and Wednesday, it was very apparent that things had shut down. Long lines to get into most of the government buildings, and the fewer staff that were around. Some amenities weren't open. Those weren't particularly important, but nevertheless, they weren't there. Lots of discussions with security staff and others who weren't being paid and weren't sure exactly when they're going to get paid. But I think one of the things that was striking to me is that I sensed a lack of urgency amongst the members of Congress to do something. I mean, this morning I was stopped by a constituent who asked me, is the federal government still shut down? I said, yes, it is. He asked me if he should withdraw his money from his bank. Of course, I told him, no, that's not necessary, but I'd hope that the members of Congress who are fighting amongst themselves and causing this to continue would understand that this is having real impacts. And whether it's stuff like the air show or the gentleman I spoke with this morning, they have to come to a conclusion as hopefully sooner rather than later. But it was an interesting time to be back there.
I was just talking to a Republican member,
Mm-hmm.
And they seem to be holding on to what the Tea Party is doing and all that. But locally, how cruel is the reality or is not in the local impact here in San Diego, being that we have military
Right.
outposts, and then not just that, but people is thinking just the military, but how really the reality is for the local impact.
Yeah. Well, for San Diego, the impacts obviously are acute when it comes to our military. We recently released our military economic impact report that said about 22% of jobs in our community are directly connected to military spending. And so when you think about the shutdown, the ongoing sequestration, and the potential for more problems with regard to the debt limit, all these things mean that San Diego really is in the crosshairs when it comes to these problems back in Washington. And I think is one of the reasons why I and so many others went back to sort of plead our case to Congress to find a resolution. But you're exactly right. This is not just about the military. As I mentioned, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers, and others, things that are not military. And as we know, the military and other functions of government have been given have been deemed essential, and therefore, in many cases, still operating. Some of those agencies I just mentioned aren't. And as such, it will have an impact on our ability to bring federally funded projects to our community. The Community Development Block Grant Program, often those funds go through the city to local social service providers. If we are not able to reimburse in a timely fashion, I'm concerned about the impacts they may have on nonprofit groups that are doing good work with some of the low and moderate income San Diegans that we have here in the community. So there are a lot of ways that this can impact us. And again, I'd hope that would really impress upon those who are in elected office back in Washington the urgency to come to a conclusion on this. Yes, sir.
Have you had any discussions with our local members of Congress on ways to maybe buffer the effects of the shutdown and sequestration? For example, Congressman Peters has been a fierce advocate of the NIH programs at UCSD and the biotech industry in that area. Have you discussed ways to kind of help them survive this?
I met with all 5 of our members of Congress and both of our senators. All of them expressed a desire to see this come to a conclusion, but I was struck by the fact that I think even beyond our local delegation, folks were just talking past each other. We had a forum yesterday with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs in the San Diego Chamber of Commerce speaking with members of Congress. We had members from across the United States, Pennsylvania, Colorado, elsewhere present, and even in the same room, they're not really talking to each other. They're talking past each other. And there seems to be obviously the focus on the Affordable Care Act, which in my estimation really is something separate than whether or not we fund our government. And so, I'm concerned. Senator Feinstein had mentioned that she has never seen such animosity in her 20 years in being back there. And so that was concerning to me as well about whether or not people can really come together. But they absolutely have to. And I think that they need to hear from local elected officials like myself to say, we don't really have a choice in the matter. I have to keep Brownfield operating. I need air traffic controllers there. I need these critical infrastructure projects to happen. But again, I think everyone expressed a desire or willingness to do that. I just wasn't seeing a lot of that happening.
What about your observations of the way our local representatives are interacting with one another? Congressman Issa and Hunter.
Yeah. Well, the meeting that we had yesterday morning, almost all of them were present in the room at the same time. And I mean, they're collegial. I mean, they obviously work together to advance San Diego's interests, but it's on this broader issue, obviously, again, sort of wrapped up in the Affordable Care Act that there's strong feelings on. And again, I personally think you got to set that aside and just make good budgetary decisions. We have to do that here at the city. We have passed budgets that, didn't include things I particularly cared for, but it was the right thing to do for the city. And, I'd hope to see a similar sort of wherewithal when it comes to our local delegation. I actually do think Scott Peters has been a leader on this issue. He's a part of a coalition called No Labels, and that was one of the more interesting conversations that we had. I think that was Tuesday, where you had members of Congress from both parties there present saying, we don't particularly care about our party identification. We're interested in getting results. And I thought he was particularly eloquent on that issue, and I think quite sincere. If there was more of that, I would suspect that we'd have a very short shutdown. But again, judging from all the people I spoke with, I'm not so sure that that's a widely held belief in terms of the willingness to come to the center and really set aside party for the best of the nation.
Can you expand a little bit on your meeting with the Smithsonian people?
Yeah.
The type of things that they're talking about maybe bringing here?
Right. So this is our third meeting with the Smithsonian Institution in about a year's time. 2 meetings in Washington, 1 meeting here in San Diego. All have been very good. We met with Assistant Secretary Brown and a number of her staff. And, I think what we're getting to is more specifics, which is obviously good. The Centennial is just around the corner. They have a number of traveling exhibits, particularly focused, obviously, on education that we want to have. Education has to be a key component of the Centennial. And we believe that they have some exhibits that we could help bring to San Diego that would augment what our existing cultural institutions are already planning. So I think that that's encouraging. Each of the we went back with a list of artifacts that some of the museums know the Smithsonian has that they might want to borrow for that year. We asked the Smithsonian, they're now doing a sort of review of whether or not those objects are available in 2015. Can they be loaned to us? How do we do that? So there's that. And then the Centennial Committee has developed sort of a concept of a forum that would be potentially in the Alcazar Garden or in the Plaza de Panama, something along the lines of a TEDx, where you're bringing in sort of high-level thinkers, both locally and nationally, internationally, to have these forums and discussions about ideas and concepts. The Smithsonian has a somewhat similar program that potentially, as we have these speakers throughout the year, some that we'll procure through the Centennial Committee, perhaps some through the Smithsonian. So there are a lot of connections. There's a lot of excitement. The Smithsonian had been involved in the similar kind of celebration in Denver not long ago that they were providing us some advice on. So it was a pretty meaty conversation. It gives me hope that we'll be able to give something pretty spectacular to the people in 2015.
It's safe to say that you're not talking about the Hope Diamond coming here, but do you have any examples of what some of the objects are?
No, I can get you that information. No, not along those lines. But actually, interestingly, I don't want to lose sight of this. The individual institutions, the Museum of Art, MOPA, Fleet, others, they have been planning for this for some time. So within their 4 walls, we already have a sense of what's going to be there, and I think some of it's going to be pretty spectacular. What we're looking to do is to kind of, again, augment and to fill some of the public spaces through the Centennial Committee. Again, to just give it more heft, more offerings, more things for San Diegans and visitors alike to come and participate and join. So I think we're making decent progress.
Let me take a step back.
Tony?
I apologize to my colleague that I was a little late. I was held up by Ace parking. With our 33,000 employees
Yes.
laid off, our infrastructure needs, our heavy federal presence here in San Diego, is San Diego more vulnerable to this shutdown than any place in the country?
Carlos sort of asked this. We are acutely impacted because 22% of our local jobs have a direct connection to military spending. Obviously, that's a very large number of folks. When you add in obviously, again, the military contractors, the directly employed federal employees, we have a stake in this game, and that's why myself and so many others went back to Washington to argue that point. And I want to be clear, with the help of our newly rehired city representatives in Washington, we're going to continue to press that point every single day, not just the once or twice a year that I may be able to get there. But we are impacted more than I think other communities, and that's why I think we're going to be pretty outspoken on this issue until Congress finds a resolution. She hasn't
You
added.
touched on it earlier, but can you just kind of give your own personal thoughts on the cancellation of the air show? I mean, it's kind of an institution here, and how sad is it for San Diego?
It is that. The cancellation of the Miramar Air Show is incredibly disappointing, both from an economic standpoint. We know that the base support programs, particularly for military families, count on the dollars that are generated by this project to support their needs. But also from an emotional standpoint, San Diegans love the air show. They go every single year to enjoy it, and we're not going to have that opportunity this year. And I think that it's more frustrating when you know that this is because of political gridlock in Washington as opposed to any sort of national security need. So it's disappointing. It's not where we should be, and hopefully it will energize San Diegans to speak out and really demand, again, a compromise in Washington so we can get back to doing the people's work.
I mean, because the money was there for it. I mean, it was ready to go. It was, it's not like there's planes on the tarmac,
Right. Well, not only is the money there, and mind you, the city is an investor in the air show. Councilmember Lorie Zapf took some of her budgetary savings from her office to help fund some of the air show this year. Again, we're trying to do what we can at the city to keep this important program alive, but it generates money. And those dollars are really critical. They go back into family supporting programs on the base. And when you think about the sequestration, the budget reductions that have already happened, I don't really think they can spare a dime when it comes to supporting our military families. And San Diegans like going to the event because they know that by doing that, they're supporting military families. So it's really disappointing. It shows how illogical things are back in Washington, that you could take a money-making event and cancel it under the auspices of saving money. It's bizarre. It's emblematic of the problems that we're having in our nation's capital. And again, I hope it serves as a reason to galvanize San Diegans to demand some change. Carlos.
Yeah, being that San Diego is one of the top cities in the United States, and the importance of military precision and everything else, the city of San Diego, are you planning, if this continue, to make probably a resolution within all the city council Democrats and Republicans to send a strong message to the Congress and Senate that this needs to stop?
We'll see. The question is whether or not council might take some sort of action or resolution to press upon Congress to take action. We've done that in the past. We've done that with our annual legislative package that we send. We've taken strong positions on comprehensive immigration reform, military sequestration, redevelopment, other things. So it wouldn't be out of the question. I think my hope would be that Congress would act sooner and that they would resolve this in the next couple of days. But if they not, I imagine we may weigh in at some point in time. Again, I have to tell you, one of the importance of rehiring our city's lobbyists was to make sure that there were people back there every day of the week communicating our position. I was joined during the trip by our lobbyists. They heard from the members of Congress, and the senators heard from me specifically why this was important to San Diego. But that message will get repeated day after day because of those folks being back there for us.
Any crystal ball that you could see when this is going to end?
No, I can't project. I can only hope that it's soon.
Can you talk specifically, are there any infrastructure projects, priorities within the city that are going to be directly affected? We talked about the jobs, military, but from an infrastructure standpoint, what's going to happen locally?
I don't have specific infrastructure projects at this point in time. I think we're reviewing what we have in this year's budget and anything that's kind of in the design phase. But it would be anything that would require permits from the federal government, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, others, and then any that might have grant funding that are attached to it. And we do get a significant amount of federal grants. So there is a real potential to impact projects.
Can you give us kind of a guesstimate of how much of that money comes from the federal government?
I can't, but we'll follow up with you and get you that number. Joshua?
In your estimate, what are the most important services that will be impacted by this?
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting question because I've thought about that, and you all have done a great job of widely reporting what will be impacted. But I think what hasn't been quantified is what it says about our country, and I'm very concerned about our nation's reputation. If we don't have a budget. And I think we've articulated some of those, but the reputation issue of whether or not we can govern this democracy, and it does not send a good message to our partners elsewhere in the globe, particularly in a global economy where we're competing for investment against every other nation. That this is just does not make us look good. With regard to local stuff, again,
There's a difference between like WIC coupons and air show.
Correct. Understood. And some of those, obviously Social Security checks are still being processed. The military is being paid. But, it's kind of, I guess, as someone who's done this work for a while, I wonder about where does this end? Between sequestration, so the reductions that people are already dealing with, now the federal shutdown, the potential issues around the debt limit, these all will have impacts on people in San Diego. They are currently, and they may get worse. And again, it's more people than perhaps folks understand. And I think that's a story that all of you are trying to tell. Some of you have told, but I hope that you'd continue to do that, because I have heard or seen on television some people say, well, nothing big's happen. They just, so you can't visit the Point Loma Lighthouse. Well, no, it's more impactful than that. And for some folks who have very limited opportunities or no alternatives, I'm very concerned about what this means for them.
When do you think the Tram, Balboa Park
Uh, so, sorry, that sounded worse than I meant to.
Transition.
Well, thank you. So we have the trams. We own them today. We didn't have a fueling station. It's my understanding the fueling station was began construction last week. And hopefully that won't take terribly long. The other piece of this is the operator piece. We have gone through an RFP process to select a provider. And once that process is complete, then we should be able to start services. My hope is that it would be certainly this fall, relatively soon, frankly. But with our procurement process, the potential for protests, one can't be particularly certain. But my goal is to have it up sooner than it was going to be under the previous administration. I think we'll be able to hit that mark. Anyone else? Dean, how are you?
Pretty good. Walt Eckert left.
Yes.
Or has announced he's leaving. And when he was hired into his current position by Mayor Filner, he was hired at a salary of $5,000 a year. I'm wondering, was that one of the inflated salaries that Filner was giving out at the time, or was it within normal operations of the city?
I think what you're referring to were some of the increases that Bob Filner provided to his personal staff in the waning days of his administration, some of which were incredibly inflated, and we still don't necessarily know to the extent that they were justified. With regard to Walt Eckert, I don't think that is what applies. Walt came in at a time, really, I think, for all the right reasons. He saw a city that was in turmoil. He knew that he had a skill set that could be helpful, and he did that, and he did it incredibly well. He has been invaluable, both during the turmoil and then during the transition, and in the first month of my administration. I think that every San Diegan is grateful for his help, and I think they will be impressed by Scott Chadwick's leadership because he is equally exceptional, and I think will do a great job of running the city next number of months.
One more question?
The convention center.
Yes.
Next week.
Mm-hmm.
The commission meets here. I know you've talked to Mark Fabiani. He's probably told you what he's told the rest of us, that the convention center project, if it goes, will pretty well preclude any plan for a stadium.
Right.
Are you concerned that by getting coastal commission approval for the convention center expansion, however needed it is, could set off a chain of events that could chase the Chargers out of town to some dreadful place like Los Angeles?
Says the guy who works for the LA Times. How are you allowed to say that? The short answer is no. The question was the connection between the Phase 3 convention center expansion and the Chargers. Here's what I say. We are a big city, and we can do both. We can expand our convention center, and the new football stadium can and should be a part of Phase 4. The difficulty in really comparing those, and I think it's apples and oranges, is that with the convention center Phase 3 expansion, we know everything. We know what the project is, we know its size, we know its cost, and we know how we're funding it. We don't have the same specificity with the football stadium. My commitment to Mr. Fabiani and to the Chargers is that we will go to the Coastal Commission on October 10th, and then October 11th we will get approval, and then on October 11th we'll begin those discussions with the Chargers in order to get the same level of specifics so that we can take that to the public and see if they can support it. I think the conversations have been good. I recognize that they have a preference, but we have a preference as well, and I think we just have an honest disagreement in terms of the projects. But again, I disagree with the premise that it's an either-or situation. I believe that we're a big city. We can do big things. You saw that with our new central library. You'll see it with our convention center, and you'll see it when we retain professional football here in San Diego.
So you then don't believe Fabiani when he says approving the convention center expansion precludes that plan that he and some others are pushing for something nearby. His assertion to me was that pretty well scuttles that, and then it's the Qualcomm property or no place at all. Do you not believe his premise that it would scuttle the idea of something near the water off of the Coastal Commission authority?
No, because they have a different site, which is not a part of the Phase 3 expansion. So we're not taking away that land to make it exclusively for convention center space. That land still does exist in East Village. You still have community support for putting it there. And that neighborhood actually does want to see that facility constructed there. The question is about the financing. But I understand where he's coming from. But again, I don't know how much the project he's trying to build costs. And until I know that, I can't say with any certainty that it's a no. But he's going to have the city's commitment that we will be there to try and help. But we don't, again, have the specifics to be able to do that. At the end of the day, though, for me, and everyone knows, not the biggest professional football guy in the world right here, what I am, though, is an avid supporter of this city. And I believe we're a world-class city, and world-class cities have professional sports. And so I want us to have that. We should be engaged in that conversation, as should the county and others. And that as we make a specific proposal come to life with regard to the footprint that's involved, the size and the scope and the amenities and the services that will be in that project, what it will cost, and how much the Chargers and the NFL are willing to pay for it, and then what the difference is and where those funds may come from. That's the work that we have not done yet, and I'm very interested in making sure the project that we have all that information for, the Phase 3 expansion, is approved by the Coastal Commission, that we move forward with constructing that. But again, I don't believe that they're mutually exclusive.
I take it from, I mean, to be a dog on a bone here, but I take it from what you're saying, you've moved, maybe not moved away, but you're not embracing the no public money rhetoric. You're more into what one of the leading mayoral candidates is saying, it must be a good deal for the city. So it sounds from what you're saying, is that you're not precluding some public investment if it is a good financial deal for the city at the bottom line.
It has to be a good deal for taxpayers, and that's the information I don't have today.
You're not on the no tax money, the Richard Ryder-esque viewpoint?
Well, I'm realistic, and I know that we already have public money in our current football facility, and that's true today, and it will be true next year and for many years to come. And so I recognize that we already have some obligations of public money where that's concerned. That may be the case going forward. I would delight, as the budget chairman, I would delight in an opportunity not to have public money in that and to use those dollars elsewhere. But that may not be possible. And if you agree with me that we should do our best to keep professional sports in San Diego, then perhaps we should make an investment. Is that investment more than what we're currently investing into Qualcomm? I don't necessarily know that. But again, these are the things that I can't answer because I lack specifics at this time.
We can have Comic-Con and the Chargers.
Say again?
We can have Comic-Con and the Chargers.
We can, and that should be our goal. I think that we should aim as high as possible. We are a great, not just American city, we are a world-class city. We should not be having to choose between Comic-Con or the Chargers, and I don't think that we have to. I think we can do both. It's going to be hard. I don't want to misrepresent that it's going to be an easy task to do, but in the way that we've spent over 5 years planning and moving slowly through the approval process for the convention center expansion, we have to do that same work with the Chargers Stadium, and I, for one, am committed to try and help do that. All right, guys, thank you so much. We'll see you again this time next week.